Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So today we're really pleased to be joined by Helen Garlick. Helen is the author of No Place to Lie About Family Secrets. Formerly a family lawyer, a mediator and trainer, she's now continuing to work on her own writing, including The Power of Owning Your Own Story. She's run coastal writing retreats in North Devon and is a true believer in the healing power of blue, whether the sea or other bodies of water. She's strongly in favour of busting the shame, silence around family secrets, and has a YouTube channel called Hello, It's Better to Talk. She currently lives in Devon with her husband Tim Rice, not that one, and 3 dogs, and between them they have 5 adult children. Welcome, Helen.
Welcome, Esther. Thank you. It's really great to be here. So thanks very much. What a nice welcome that was. Lovely to be here.
Hello, Helen. Very nice to meet you indeed. Thanks a lot for being here with us. So our invite to you was prompted by your book, No Place to Lie. Why did you have to wait for your parents to die in order to write this book?
Well, so this book, there was the kind of germ of a book ever since 1981, on St. David's Day, 1981, when I was in America and I had a phone call from my father, who was in Yorkshire, to tell me that there'd been a terrible accident and that my brother had died. And so it was the most awful moment in my life, finding out about that, and flying back to Yorkshire, that sort of sense of being in a void, and not knowing where to turn and what had happened. But as I started to piece together what had happened, it wasn't a terrible accident. I mean, it was even more terrible in a way, because my brother had taken his life, but my parents couldn't. I don't think they actually could carry on living if they felt that had been the case and that it had been a deliberate act. So there was always the frame of David's death being a terrible accident. And I couldn't have actually written that. I couldn't have written about this, or I didn't even talk about it very much until after they died. So my father died. Both my parents got dementia. My father died in 2014 and my mum died in 2017. On 21st of December, the shortest day, which isn't it was no coincidence, because she was very much a son lover. And then I knew that I had to write this book. So I wrote it over lockdown, as many of us did do creative projects. And then, you run out of excuses, don't you? Once lockdown's there, about I can't do this, I can't do that because of work. I stepped back from work as a lawyer and, went through the discipline of writing. But there was another secret now which had emerged since my mum's death, and I knew that I had to write about that. So it took me a long time. But I think one of the things that we have to do as authors is think about the impact and consequences on our close family, and people, who you care for and love and who love you, so that you can't just blithely write about everything. I think you really need to look at it in the round. And I knew my parents almost couldn't have survived if I'd actually written the way I wanted to write during their lifetimes.
Thank you. And what terrible news to get, whether you were away or at home, really. I'm always struck when I hear something like that. An immediate thought is something about, this can't be undone. One can't go back from this. And that thought lives on with one, I think.
Quite right. I mean, I think you go into denial. I mean, I just couldn't. I was in shock, and I just kept thinking, this can't have happened. It's not true. Denial is that, yeah. But it was true. I was lucky enough to be with some very loving people in St. Louis in Mississippi, and on the Mississippi, and they kind of just wrapped me up. I mean, literally with blankets, and put me on a plump sofa and just held my hand and talked to me and fed me and, treated me like a baby. I mean it in a way, which is actually what I needed at that time, just to be surrounded by human love. I think human connection is so powerful. I mean, God knows if I'd have received that information, received that news on my own, that's a big thing to think about. But anyway, yeah, you're right, David. It's it's happened, and it changes your life completely. It felt like, and made me wake up to things that had happened in my family earlier on, and you have to start coming to terms with things like that. You can't play pretend any longer.
One of the things I thought you did really powerfully, actually, in your book, Helen, is talk about kind of like the aftermath, that in that immediate aftermath, how disconnected from ourselves we can end up being, and the confusion of something that's so unthinkable happening, that actually what happens afterwards. There's that sense of you being disconnected from yourself in the book, which I thought was quite brave to put out there too.
Thank
but also
you.
I think could be really useful for people to hear that was how your journey went.
Yeah, it was funny when I was writing the book. I'd kind of go back in time almost and be writing from the me, the 22-year-old me, at times. And there's a chapter 27, when I'm describing having come back to Doncaster and it's grey and cold, and being at my parents' place, and my mum on Valium and then howling every night, really like an animal, and just the awfulness of it. But there's another author called Orlando Murray who came on one of my writing retreats, and he said, chapter 7 in your book is so powerful. And I said, why? And he said, because you actually don't say any emotion. You don't say, I felt this, I felt that. There's no description of emotions. It's just you're like an automaton. And it was funny, I hadn't realised that I'd done that when I wrote it, but I did put myself back in that moment of time, in those moments of time, and that's what I felt like I didn't know how to get through life, really. It was just sort of putting one foot in front of the other, doing what I had to do, but with this huge sort of like a black void inside me. And it would disappear in the mornings, when you slept. I mean, sleep being the great healer, and you wake up, there's just a few seconds when you might be quite peaceful from a dream, or and then suddenly, wham! It hits you again, and then oh God, I've got to go through it all again. Very difficult.
Well, that's a very powerful description as well, Helen. So, tell us, if you can, what are the central themes of the book?
I think that as I was writing it, a really key one is family secrets and the powerful effect that they have on you, and how you're kind of brought up almost in a way to not see things. I don't know quite how to say that, other than it like that. There are things in my life that actually have blindsided me, and that that was also the secret that my mum was carrying. When you kind of find out about it, then you wake up and think, oh my God, I mean, of course that was what was going on, but you kind of trundle along, for the previous time in your life without realizing it. So I think there's the thing about not talking, about not communicating, that's in families, and avoiding difficult conversations. And I'm not certainly don't have any sense of sort of blame of my parents. They were both brought up. They were both born just after the early 1930s, and they were of what's called the cohort of the silent generation. So they were brought up to keep quiet, just get on with it. Don't talk about feelings. Feelings don't really exist. I was told that depression doesn't exist. Nobody ever asked me how I felt as a child. It just wasn't a question that you'd ever get asked, So it's the not talking about the things that matter and talking about everything else. That's a real theme of the book. I think also, actually, love is a theme of the book, really, an underlying theme about the importance of love, and how, I discovered how my brother much more about how my brother had taken his life by getting to know his best friend at the time, and we ended up having a relationship, and he and my brother had very difficult relationships with their dads. And he also had been thinking about taking his life. So I was, everything in me kind of just came for, this is not going to happen on my watch. I'm not going to lose him as well. So we had a relationship. He had this dream about going to Australia and also learning to fly, actually. And I helped him in both of those things. So, although he did it himself, but I helped manage things up for him. So loves the theme. And I think there's the 3 C's almost. It's like communication, the importance of talking from the heart, being there, listening to another person, being listened to, being in a safe space, because, you can't just go around blurting out your secrets to everybody. You need to be safe. So communication, connection, that deep connection that we really need as human beings. It's kind of hardwired in our DNA. Isolation is probably the biggest killer on the planet. And then a community, having people around you who care for you and who you care for, and just that, the little bits of your life, but having sort of being in a safe space, which is where I am now, and I'm incredibly grateful.
Thank you. I mean, you talking like this, Helen, reminds me of the big secret in my family that we only discovered after both my parents died, that my father had been married before he met my mother, and we didn't know anything about that. But I'm sure it had an impact on our family relationships.
That's a big thing, isn't it, David, actually, discovering that. And I mean, I don't know how you felt about it, but it felt to me the whole of my childhood really had been something of a lie. You look back on things and realise that things have been hidden from you, and that you never had that conversation about, I mean, I don't know if you found out that you had half siblings or anything like that. It's a big thing to discover.
No, I don't think we did. My father's first wife died in 1940, but that was just after my mother had 2 children by him. So it was a totally complicated relationship, which I think flabbergasted all of us when we found out, pretty much by chance. Gosh. But it did cast our impression of our parents in a different light. I mean, mainly I think we thought how difficult it must have been for them, just pre-Second World War. But anyway, that's enough about me.
Yeah.
But in these conversations, I think we often find, Helen, that it brings up so much in ourselves. I think that's why we find them so rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, I found that having written the book, and when people read it, and it's a brave read, it's not necessarily a beach read, but it is a brave read, and it's a page turner. But other people have written to me about their secrets, and it's like it's. I think making yourself vulnerable and sharing something then almost opens the door for other people to say, "This happened to me," and it was an incredible shock as well. So when we can share that as human beings, and that's quite healing.
Just to say, I mean, it's not a light-hearted read, but it is very, very compelling. It's not difficult to read in the sense of, that your story is so powerful and you tell it in a really beautiful way, which, I would recommend anyone just read the book, because and ultimately actually there's a sense of you processing what's been difficult. There's a sense of peacefulness at the end. It might not be a happy ending, but there's a peacefulness that come at the end.
Yeah. I suppose that comes back to a sort of value of mine, which is that, it's not our fault, the stuff that happens to us, as my younger daughter would say, the shit that happens to us, Mum, shit happens. But I think it is our responsibility to try and heal ourselves, because it feels like actually when we do that, we're not only healing what's going on for us, but hopefully we're healing what's going on for the past generation. And in a strange way, it feels like you're kind of healing the past as well. You're making it, it sits. I have a sort of now my parents are dead, I've got a much closer relationship with them, which might sound really, really odd. But, I think about them every day. I think about them with a lot of compassion and love. And I think you do have a relationship with people even after they've died. So we need to. I mean, there's that book, isn't there? It's okay not to be okay, and I think that's sort of made its way, that phrase, into our language. And it's certainly okay not to be okay for a while, and then we need to do what we can to heal ourselves, and not just stay in that. If it's possible, not to stay in the victim mindset, but try and move into taking a bit more control, taking a bit more agency over our lives, starting to live a life that we would love to live. And then that kind of spreads out to other people, hopefully.
And how do you think living with secrets affected you over the course of your life?
Well, I think the thing is that you just never know, when somebody's going to ask you a question and then how you deal with it. So a very common question is, do you have any siblings? I only had David. So, I mean, my mum lost a baby with a miscarriage, but I only had David. And then you have a choice, So do you say, I had a brother, he died by suicide? Or even occasionally on occasions, I've just said, no, I'm an only child. Because I didn't want to open, it didn't feel like a safe space to open up. Because actually, if you say my brother died by suicide, then not only are you talking about your own, what's been quite a secret part of your life, but also then you have to deal with the reaction of the listener, who's often really shocked and upset. And it may even be that, that something has happened to them. I think they say something like that 135 people are affected by each suicide. And I think that's a massive underestimate. I think huge numbers of people are affected by every suicide. I mean, I know from, my late brother's friends that it's affected their lives. One chose not to have children because he said he couldn't bear the thought of losing a child. So, that's big. But if we're talking about, the family secrets that are also covered in No Place to Lie, I mean, there's the big secret about my mum as well, which I, lived 59 years of my life not knowing. And then she left me a note after she died, which was handwritten on the back of a white envelope, to say that she was gay. The note starts off, I am different, I'm not like other people. And then she talks about the affliction of being gay, which was also like a dart to the heart about how difficult it must have been living her life. But then all sorts of things then started to come together. And maybe this was a bit, similar for you, David, I don't know. But, I found out that the family friend, Gwen, who I'd always thought of as a family friend, was actually my mother's lover when they were much, much younger. And other women that were my mother's friends had also been her lovers. And so then there's the question about, did my father know? Did they talk about it? Who else knew? And my aunt, my mum's sister, didn't know either that this had gone on. So the two of us were thinking, I think this was particularly relevant to my aunt. My aunt thought that, everybody knew, and she was just everybody thought she was stupid because she didn't know. So it has a kind of internal effect, doesn't it? It has quite a deep internal effect. And I think not being able to talk about it with other people is big. I went on the internet after I found this note, and I think I typed in something to Google like, what happens if you find out that your parent was gay posthumously? And there was no results. I mean, about 5 results, all of which were people who'd found out their parents were gay much later in life. So, talking to my younger daughter about this and said, nobody else seems to have gone through this. She said, why don't you just change the word posthumously to after death, Mum? And then you might get some more results. So I did actually, I got 1 or 2, but I don't think I've actually found anybody else so far who's found out their parent had died that their parent was gay after they died. Although quite a lot of people have contacted me to say that they strongly suspected that their parents were gay, and that even on their deathbed they didn't tell them, and I'm glad my mum did. I'm glad she left me a note. Makes a lot of things make more sense. I think every time you do, open up about it, it's better.
It's really tragic, isn't it, to think about spending your whole life living it as one person when there's part of you that you feel you have to keep secret. It's quite crushing, I think.
But she was very brave in writing that note and leaving it to you, and she gave you an insight, obviously, into the severe emotional challenges that she must have faced through much of her life.
Yeah. I mean, in her note, she also names some of the women that she had relationships with, and she says that she thinks that her mother was gay, that my grandmother was gay as well. So that was like, whoa, It actually felt like, the Titanic's going down and she's bringing everybody down with it. What I had realised, I was very close to my granny, really close. I used to stay with her at least every 2 weeks at the weekends, and which obviously would allow my parents to do whatever else they were up to. But to know that my granny had actually gone down to London, so my mum and Gwen had run away from Doncaster and set themselves up in a flat just behind Harrods in London and started building a life in London in the early 50s. And my grandmother had gone down to London to find them and somehow found them, and then said to my mum, these dirty deeds must stop and you've got to come back to Doncaster and you've got to either get a job there or find a husband. So that drama, my mother effectively agreed and went back, even though she was an adult and she could have stayed there. And then nobody ever told me about that. So it made me look at my grandmother in a completely different light as well, that, the adults know stuff that you don't know as a kid.
Yes, but these secrets, in a way, are always known. They may not be known to children in the sense of knowing the story, but they have a sort of sense of something not quite fitting, or something causing particular relationships in the family, I think.
Yeah, I think it's almost like you can sniff it out a bit, can't you? You don't even know what it is you're sniffing. But I mean, when I was little, I used to think I was adopted, basically. And I think that's not an uncommon thing for children to believe. But I was sure that I was adopted. I was sure that I'd somehow been assigned to the wrong family. And I used to go and rifle through my parents' documents box, which was an old red leather hat box. And I, whenever they were out in the garden, I'd go in through there to trying to find the adoption papers, which, never found. And actually, if you saw pictures of my parents, I look exactly like a cross between the two of them. So, but yeah, I knew that there was something up, but I just didn't know what it was. Yeah, you're right.
But like you, I used to wonder whether I was adopted as well. Yes, strange. So perhaps that's the kind of uncanny sense that enters a child's mind when he or she doesn't feel that things are totally right. You didn't have that experience, Naomi?
I didn't actually, no, but I do think it's very common thought, but no, I didn't. So,
Helen, do you think these secrets and the difficulties of talking openly in the family, do you think they contributed to your brother's state and his eventual taking his own life?
Absolutely. I think that we were brought up, about what you should do in life. There wasn't really a sense of, I think there's much more nowadays with parenting, there's more of a sense of partnering your children and partnering them through tricky times. But that, there was certain things that we had to do and certain things we should do. My father thought that my brother should be a solicitor like him. I remember overhearing a telephone conversation, and my dad said to a friend, well, David's, of course, is going to inherit my my legal practice, but it doesn't really matter what Helen does because she's a girl. So I overheard that and thought, right, I'm going to be a solicitor too. So that kind of like drove me to go down that path. Whereas my brother, he wasn't like that. He was a dreamer, an explorer. He loved fishing. He was very practical. He loved motorbikes. He had a motocross bike. So I think my brother never really felt accepted for who he was, and he was clever, but he'd never bothered working. So, so when he was 11, he was top of his class. And by the time he was 18, he scraped through with some A-levels. Amazing. He got any really, given he never ever did any homework. So I think it did have an effect on him. And I also just think he hadn't got a safe space to talk and be heard without being told off or told what he should do. So I think I rebelled. David stayed home more, I think, and I'm glad I rebelled. Actually, I had an amazing time as a teenager. I was in Sheffield in the 1970s, and it was really creative. There was a wonderful thing that the Sheffield City Council had set up called of all names, Meat Whistle. 3 people ran it, and it was just an anarchic space where you could go and put on a play, try some music, do some candles. And the Human League and Heaven 17 and various actors kind of sprang out of that. So I was having this really quite exciting life in Sheffield, and David was just at home probably ruminating and, feeling what a failure he was, and not having anybody to talk to about it. So I think that had a big impact on him.
It's interesting because when you I was interested actually in the idea that you thought maybe you were adopted, which kind of, I suppose, has that sense of, I'm not better, but there's a sense of I don't fit into this family, but I'm okay. Whereas it sounds like your brother felt like I don't fit into this family, but that's because I'm bad. I'm not good enough.
Yeah. And also, I don't know, we were really close when we were little, but then we got much more distant going through teenage years. And a couple of people have said to me that they thought that my brother was gay as well. And one of those was his best schoolmate, who came down to Devon where we live with his wife. And Caroline and Jeff had known David, all their school years. And Caroline said to me, I always knew David was gay. Really? So it may have been, that may have been going on as well. Yeah. It's funny, feeling where we fit, and is home a safe space, or is a home a very judgmental space? And, you haven't got anywhere to go, which is really lonely place to be.
And how would you think your brother's death affected you throughout your life?
Do you know, David, I think it, even now it affects me. I mean, my older daughter's hoping to have a family, and then I think, if she has a baby, then my brother will never be there. He'll never be a great uncle. He was never an uncle to my 3 children. Suicide is a terrible, terrible thing. And I think, I've done some work with Zero Suicide Alliance and with other organisations that are seeking to prevent suicide. And that feels good in many ways, but also I know that I can't do too much of it, because that sort of sense of a void, which is what I experienced, a kind of black void, which I experienced after David died, it's still there. And if I spend too much time thinking about it, I can find myself being pulled back into it. It almost feels like a kind of physical thing. So it's still there, and it's still a deep sadness. Although I am very determined to create my own little patch of heaven on earth as much as I can. So, garden where we live, trying to be there for my kids, supporting them, supporting my bonus daughters. I don't call them stepdaughters, they're bonus daughters. They're a blessing. And my husband. So, kind of trying to look after look after myself, I think it's important that we learn how to thrive, not just survive.
What's the worst aspect of living with family secrets, do you think?
I think it's just that you're in your own little bubble, and you kind of can't get a sense of like how bad is it, and share. I think it's the kind of holding of it on your own and fearing that somebody's going to ask you a question which will pop out. All those, it makes you very isolated and lonely. I really think we learned in lockdown so powerfully about how dangerous it can be to be isolated in lots of ways. I mean, even in terms of our immune system, that we haven't been around people enough, so our antibodies haven't had enough experience for a few years about attacking viruses. So there's so many things, but I think it's the loneliness of a family secret. I mean, in a way, I've talked about my mum being gay. I didn't talk so much about my brother during my life, but it was that sense of, it's a sense of shame, and by talking about it, you lift the shame. You sort of lift the secrets, you lift the shame, and then you find out how other people react, and nobody judges you as harshly as you do yourself. So people can be kind, or not necessarily kind, but you just get more of a kind of like a sense of stability rather than feeling like you're on this little boat all alone. Nobody loves you, that kind of sense. I think it must have been very difficult for my mum. My mum only died 6 days after going into a care home, and she'd written this note, and I just wonder what would have happened, if she'd told me. And I did a couple of talks at the Festival of Chichester on the power of owning your story this month. One of my mum's old friends, who is still alive in her 90s, came along to that talk, and she was due to see my mum the day after my mum died. And she lives near the care home where my mum died. And she says, every time she passes it, she looks over at it and says, "You didn't wait for me. You didn't wait for me." And she wonders whether if she'd have gone to talk to her that day as well, my mum might have actually said anything. So there's always, there's lots of what ifs, I think, that are left behind. And I just find it's just so powerful to talk about stuff rather than kind of have all these little poos of shame around you.
Well, you have a sense when you're talking about it that writing the book may have been therapeutic for you, Helen. Was it a book you felt you needed to write?
Yes. It was always a book I knew I had to write. I didn't really try writing about it until lockdown, actually. And then when I did start writing about it, it sort of burst out of me. And there were bits, that were easier to write. I read it. I can't remember actually the author's name, but he says, "Go write what hurts most. Write about what hurts most." So I wrote about the finding out about my brother's death first, and then that kind of seemed to free me up. But I had quite a physical reaction to some things. I mean, when I was writing about that feeling of not feeling after David died, I was quite catatonic. I mean, Tim came home to find me on the sofa, and I hadn't moved for about 4 hours. I knew I needed to get a drink, but I didn't seem to be able to physically get up and get a drink. So I really kind of got back into that time, which was a bit scary sometimes. But also it was releasing. It was kind of like it was, I felt lighter all the time as I was writing it and getting it out there, and then trying to really polish it like it was a gem, so I wanted it to be something that was beautiful, that I was offering to people, to readers. So yeah, I think writing can be incredibly therapeutic. I think it's not therapy. I think that, I've been through 2 periods of long-term therapy in my 20s and then in my 50s. And in my 50s, that was particularly effective. And my therapist actually put me in touch with some other women who'd had... So my mum was at that stage still alive and very difficult. quite narcissistic. And so she put me in touch with some other women who'd had that experience as daughters of narcissistic mothers. And we formed our little group called the Phoenix Group. So it's, about rising from the ashes. Mm-hmm. And that was just incredibly powerful to share, that note. I always felt that everything was my fault. I was the people pleaser, and I was the one that was supposed to make things better for my parents and deal with their problems and their relationships, and deal with my mother's problems and all that kind of thing. So kind of like stepping back, creating boundaries and learning that boundaries are my best friend was a really powerful thing to do. So I think there's the therapy and there's the writing. I think, and I'd encourage people to do both. If you've experienced trauma, it's writing about it is really helpful, but therapy is also really, really helpful. So do both.
I think that's a really good point, but I think actually the combination of both might be most powerful in the sense of double, amplifying what you're trying to achieve therapeutically. I just started reading a book by Penny Baker and Smith, who did the research around writing, expressive writing, and how therapeutic that can be. And there is good science around managing to heal ourselves through expressive writing. I was thinking about the fact that they're just talking about expressive writing for one's self, whereas actually you were writing with a view to, have an audience potentially from that. And I wondered what it's like to go public with Family Secrets and what that might be like.
Well, I think it was a process, So it took me about 2 or 3 years to learn about how to write a book, and learning things like, as the protagonist, you are a character, and you have to kind of write yourself into the book as a character, so people understand you, and not only what you were doing, but your kind of interiority is a phrase. I'm not even sure if that's a word, but anyway, that's a phrase that sometimes comes up for authors. So learning about that, which actually gives you a bit more agency. I think it was a process, and I learned a lot. But I should also probably make clear that I journal every day, or as much as I can. So I've got my own private writing, and I'll probably burn that before I die, God willing. But that's very private, and so and actually it's often very boring, But that's where I kind of whisper to myself and listen to myself at the same time. So that's a private thing. And then when you're kind of coming out with the secret, you don't have to reveal everything. And what would a memoir cover? Probably less than 1% of your life, considerably less than 1% of your life. So you have choices about what you reveal and you don't reveal. And then how was it? It was wonderful and strange and empowering. I had a weird experiences. I remember somebody on LinkedIn, a Swedish psychiatrist, writing to me to say that she knew that my parents knew something that I didn't. And she was absolutely certain about this. And she just kept writing to me about this. And I eventually had to block her, because it was like, I don't care. This is not what I want in my life at the moment. So people have odd reactions. People have also opened up a lot to me privately in conversations, whereas they haven't told their family about things. And I find that, like the people who have told me about members of their family who have taken their lives, that nobody at work knows about, things like that. And so I encourage them to get some support, some professional support about that. So I have had I've had amazing reactions, Naomi and David. People have said the book's transformed them. It's made them talk about something that they hadn't done. I've had, letters from Ireland and Australia. So that's been amazing. All sorts of, the audience is so much wider than you think it is. I actually was limiting myself to start off with, because I had this awful idea that actually somebody, a family member of my ex-husband would be sitting there going, you did it, you did it, kind of really, really critical. It was like a kind of witch in the corner attacking me. And then And then I realised that, I mean, she can be there and she can attack me, but there's just like hundreds or thousands of other people who have really benefited from it. So, I really encourage people to talk about things. That's why I've got this YouTube channel, Hello, It's Better to Talk, which I must do some more recording on. So,
And we will share a link to that as well in our in our show notes, and also we'll put the transcript up on Substack and share a link to it there. But I'm not surprised people have revealed their secrets to you after reading your book, because I think actually, like for instance, your mum sounds like she could be quite difficult at times, and yet you manage to discuss her as a whole human being with those flaws, and yet still manage to do so in a compassionate, understanding way in terms of what's happening. But when I was reading that, I was thinking about one of the tasks that's really common to therapy is, I think people often come wanting to be able to tell their own story, to be able to take ownership of it and have their perspective validated. And I guess writing a memoir seems like it might be an alternative way to do this, even if you never publish a memoir, but do it for your own personal self or for your family.
Yeah, I think, I've run a couple of retreats so far at the Smugglers Rest in Morthoe in North Devon, and people have come on that actually with different writing projects. But, one person came on it because he wanted to write about a great aunt called Kitty, who'd had an amazing life. And, there was very little known about her, but he'd found this letters and also, and he wanted to kind of, for her to be remembered and his relationship with her to be remembered. And then there are other people who have, who've experienced quite difficult things, who want to write about it. Because I think, when you share your story, it might have come from shame, but when you share your story, you might find that you're really a leading light, you're a role model for somebody else in coming out of the dire mess that they're in. So, because we all learn from others, don't we? Right from year dot, we're learning all the time from other people. So sharing your story can help you do that.
Absolutely. I think the other thing with shame, of course, is it causes us to want to hide, doesn't it? I mean, that's why we, cover our faces or hang our heads in shame, is that wish to kind of like withdraw and disconnect. And actually exposing the shame or the shameful secret, we actually learn that, the shame evaporates. And often, for many people, the shame doesn't belong with them at all. When people have come with histories of abuse where they're really carrying the shame of their parents or somebody else's behaviour towards them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. No. Shame is a very it's a very difficult thing, isn't it? I think when you talk about abuse, that's often been collusive, and if you tell anybody about it, I will do this. So there's a fear of what might happen as well.
And is there any more you can say about your writing retreats? Are they continuing?
Well, we're actually going to be moving from Devon, so our house is going on the market at the end of next week. I'm hoping to move to Avebury in Wiltshire. So,
oh right, lovely.
There's a rather lovely place there that would be an alternative venue. So, yeah, the idea about the power of writing your story is it's distilling. It took me 2 to 3 years, as I said, to kind of work out how to write and how to write well, so that things kind of lift off the page and they're interesting to other people. So it's about that, but it talks about your purpose. I think the clearer that you get about your goal and why you're writing, the clearer the writing becomes. And then it talks about we talk about landscape and emotions, a bit about dialogue and character, and then the narrative arc. So it's also important to to fit your story into story form and an arc form, and we all know those stories. We all know it's about a hero's journey in a way, and you start. You can start in a bad place, and then you get out of it. I mean, the sort of classic narrative arc is man in a hole. So man is all right, man goes down into a terrible hole, and then man comes up again. What's actually interesting about lots of stories that are being written at the moment is that you often end up on quite a minor note. So there isn't a kind of like, you said that my book ended on a peaceful resolution, but sometimes, people end up in like a terrible place. I think it's quite important that we help illuminate things rather than, talk more and more about the dark stuff. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of, frankly, incredibly weird stuff happening out there at the moment. So, if we can kind of hold a safe space for ourselves, and shine a light on it, always with a notion of healing through it, then that's there. So I think, I've had amazing feedback. I think I help people be seen. My journey from being a lawyer to being a mediator helped me to, instead of make statements, I ask questions, and I've learnt how to ask very good questions over the years and then listen to the answers. So, I hope to run them again and maybe amongst the standing stones of Avebury one day.
Brilliant. That's such a good way of putting it as well. The travel from statements to asking questions. I like that.
Thank you.
Helen, is there anything else that you would recommend to us and our listeners, which you do, which enables you to have a healthier life?
Well, I think that we are all learning about the huge, immense power of nature and blue spaces and green spaces. If I ever feel lost or unsure or about anything, I try and get out into the wilderness, or I try and go and swim in the sea. I mean, I saw a film a couple of days ago, which is it's had such a powerful effect on me, which is called Wilding. I don't know if you've come across it. It's about the Knepp, Knepp estate in Sussex, where they rewilded their land, which is like 5 square miles, and the land was dead. It was very marginal farmland, and they realised that, and that they started kind of like rewilding it. They brought in cows, which are as near to native cows as possible. They brought in Exmoor ponies, and deer came, and pigs, and then they've rewilded this land. And just watching the transformation of the land over 25 years now it's been going, and how purple emperor butterflies come in to eat the thistles, and how the swallows are there, and how they've got stalks now, and the value of beavers, and all this kind of thing. And I'm thinking, because we've lived in a very arid, managed landscape for a long time, and I think we need to ground ourselves, get our bare feet on living soil. We need to kind of find that. So that's the thing that's really turning me on at the moment. I'm just wondering if I could buy a little acre somewhere and then rewild it, and then because there's so much that goes on underneath the ground that's just so fascinating, and all the connections that go on in the earth. The trees are talking to one another, the plants are talking to one another, and they're helping us. But because we keep ploughing it up and keep using fungicide and pesticide, and then the land itself just becomes dirt, whereas once it's been revitalized and rewilded, it's like that. So I think I'm all about wildness now.
Excellent. That's so important.
What a lovely recommendation. Actually, it reminded me, because you also referenced blue space, and we were due to have a conversation with the marine biologist Wallace J. Nichols, who wrote Blue Mind, which is a really lovely book if you've not read, but unfortunately he dies just a couple of days before we were scheduled to record.
So sad. That's so sad. Yeah, no, that's really powerful as well. Yeah, living by the sea here is amazing. I'm a volunteer seal watcher for Atlantic grey seals, and that's been wonderfully healing. And they're amazing. It's a very matriarchal group, and they're not a colony. They're just they do their own thing. But there's all sorts of magical things about seals. I mean, seals can decide once they get pregnant whether or not they're going to have the baby. Can you imagine that? So if they're feeling poorly, or that there's not enough fish around, or the circumstances aren't right, then they abort. So extraordinary. There's a word for it, and I can't remember what the word is. But anyway, they're amazing things.
Adds a whole new dimension to when you think about what you can do with the mind. So fantastic. But so good to have the chance to talk with you today, and also to hear about journaling, which we've discussed with a previous guest on the Locked Up Living podcast. So it's always interesting to talk to writers, I think, about how writing in itself is is such a well-being activity.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. You're doing great work. I mean, it's amazing that you're putting these out so regularly, and you've got such fascinating guests. I'm very honoured to be included in your crew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're very lucky indeed. But thanks very much indeed, Helen. That was a great conversation.
Thank you.